The rain wasn't supposed to be this heavy. Marcus Chun stood at the kitchen window of his cramped one-bedroom apartment, watching sheets of water cascade down the glass like a waterfall. The weather forecast had called for light showers, maybe. Some wind. What was hammering against his building now sounded like the sky was tearing itself apart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. His phone buzzed on the counter behind him, the emergency alert cutting through the sound of the storm. Flash flood warning. Seek higher ground immediately. Avoid driving. He glanced at the glowing screen, then back at the street below. Water was already pooling around the storm drains, rushing toward the lower end of Maple Street, where the old houses sat like tired soldiers against the hill. Marcus had lived in Riverside Heights for 3 years now, ever since the divorce became final, and he needed somewhere cheap to start over. The neighborhood wasn't much to look at: weathered homes with small yards, corner stores with flickering neon signs, and streets that seemed to collect every piece of litter the wind could carry. But it was home now, and more importantly, it was what he could afford on his mechanic's salary. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. The sudden darkness made the storm sound even more violent, like nature had turned up the volume just to make sure everyone was paying attention. Marcus felt around the kitchen drawer until his fingers found the flashlight he'd bought at the dollar store. The beam cut through the blackness, illuminating the sparse furniture and the stack of unpaid bills on his table. He'd been planning to spend the evening the same way he spent most evenings lately. A frozen dinner heated in the microwave, maybe a beer if he felt like splurging, and whatever was on the basic cable package that came with the apartment. It wasn't much of a life, but it was quiet. After 2 years of fighting with Jennifer about money, about his long hours at the garage, about everything and nothing, quiet felt like a luxury. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing closer. Marcus moved to the front window, pushing aside the thin curtains he'd hung when he first moved in. Red and blue lights strobed through the rain, reflecting off the flooding street. An ambulance raced past, its wake sending water splashing onto the sidewalks. Something was wrong. This wasn't just a bad storm anymore. Marcus grabbed his rain jacket from the hook by the door and stepped onto his small front porch. The wind hit him immediately, trying to push him back inside. He had to grip the railing to keep his footing. Across the street, old Mrs. Patterson was standing in her doorway, her white hair wild around her face as she shouted something he couldn't hear over the storm. He jogged across the flooded street, his work boots splashing through water that was already ankle-deep. Mrs. Patterson grabbed his arm as soon as he reached her porch. "Marcus, thank God," she yelled over the wind. "It's the Hendersons' house. The water's rising too fast. I think someone's still inside." Marcus looked down the street toward the Henderson place, a small blue house that sat at the lowest point of the block. Even in the darkness, he could see that the water around it was much deeper than anywhere else, maybe 3 feet inclining. The current was strong enough to carry debris, lawn chairs, garbage cans, things that should have been heavy enough to stay put. "I thought they evacuated," Marcus called back. "Tom and Sarah did, but I heard crying earlier." "Baby crying," Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked. "I tried calling 911, but the lines are jammed." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through his jacket. The Hendersons had twin babies, barely 6 months old. Emma and Ethan. He'd seen Sarah pushing them in their double stroller on the neighborhood, always looking exhausted but smiling whenever anyone stopped to coo over them. "Are you sure they're still in there? I heard them, Marcus." "I know." "What babies sound like?" Mrs. Patterson's eyes were wide with fear. "The water's rising so fast." "If someone doesn't..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Marcus looked back at the Henderson house. The water was definitely getting deeper. He could see it creeping up the front steps, and the current was strong enough that walking through it would be dangerous, let alone impossible, for anyone trying to carry 2 infants. "Call 911 again," he told Mrs. Patterson. "Keep trying. I'm going to check." "Marcus, no, it's too dangerous. Wait for the fire department." But Marcus was already moving. He'd worked on enough flood-damaged cars to know how quickly water could turn deadly. If there were babies in that house, they didn't have time to wait for help that might not come soon enough. The water was deeper than it had looked from Mrs. Patterson's porch. By the time Marcus reached the Hendersons' front yard, it was up to his knees and flowing fast enough that he had to lean into the current to keep from being swept off his feet. Debris bumped against his legs, tree branches, pieces of siding, something that might have been a child's toy. The front door of the house was still above water, but not by much. Marcus pounded on it with his fist. "Hello, Tom, Sarah. Anyone in there?" No answer except the sound of the storm. He tried the handle. Locked. Of course it was locked. Marcus looked around the front of the house, squinting through the rain. There was a window on the side that looked like it might lead to the living room. The water was shallower there, only up to his shins. Marcus waded over to the window and cupped his hands against the glass, trying to see inside. The house was dark, but he thought he could make out shapes, furniture, maybe a couch. And then he heard it, crying, faint but unmistakable, baby crying. "Jesus," Marcus muttered. He tried to lift the window, but it was either locked or swollen shut from the humidity. He looked around for something to break it with and spotted a decorative garden stone near what used to be a flower bed. The stone went through the glass on the second try, leaving a hole just big enough for Marcus to climb through. He cleared away the worst of the sharp edges with his jacket sleeve and hauled himself inside. The house was dark and smelled like wet carpet and fear. Marcus clicked on his flashlight and swept the beam around the living room. Water was seeping in under the front door, forming a growing puddle on the hardwood floor. The crying was louder now, coming from somewhere deeper in the house. "Hello," Marcus called out. "I'm here to help. Where are you?" The crying continued, but no adult voice answered. Marcus made his way through the living room, his flashlight beam dancing ahead of him. The kitchen was empty, dishes still in. The sink, like the family, had been interrupted in the middle of their normal evening routine. The crying was coming from upstairs. Marcus took the steps 2 at a time. The second floor was quieter, removed from the immediate threat of the rising water, but he could hear it lapping against the house's foundation below. The crying was coming from a room at the end of a short hallway. The nursery door was closed. Marcus pushed it open and stepped inside. 2 cribs sat side by side near the window, and in each one was a baby. They couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 months old, both crying with the kind of desperation that comes from being scared and alone for too long. One had dark hair like his father, the other lighter like Sarah, Emma and Ethan Henderson. Hey, it's okay," Marcus said, softly approaching the cribs. "I'm here. Everything's going to be okay." But even as he said it, he could hear the water getting louder downstairs. The house groaned around them like it was in pain. Marcus had never been particularly good with babies. During his marriage to Jennifer, they'd talked about having kids someday, but someday had never come. Work had always gotten in the way, or money problems, or one of their fights. Now, looking down at these 2 tiny, helpless faces, he felt a kind of panic he'd never experienced before. Think, he told himself. Think. He needed to get them out of here. But how do you carry 2 babies through floodwater? He looked around the nursery and spotted a large laundry basket in the corner. It was plastic, the kind with high sides. It might float, and it would keep the babies together and above water if he could manage it right. Marcus emptied the basket quickly, tossing out tiny clothes and blankets. He lined the bottom with a couple of the softer blankets and then, very carefully, lifted the first baby from his crib. The little boy stopped crying for a moment, looking up at Marcus with wide, curious eyes. "That's right, buddy. We're getting out of here." He placed the baby gently in the basket, then reached for his sister. She was smaller, lighter, and when Marcus picked her up, she made a soft cooing sound that somehow made his chest feel tight. "Both of you are being very brave," he murmured, settling her next to her brother in the makeshift boat. "Just a little boat ride, okay?" The sound of breaking glass came from downstairs. Marcus looked toward the nursery door and saw water reflecting. His flashlight beam at the bottom of the stairs. The first floor was flooding fast. There was no time to go back the way he'd come. Marcus looked at the nursery window. It faced the side yard, and from what he could remember, there was a section of roof below it that covered the kitchen extension. If he could get the babies onto that roof, maybe he could figure out a way to get them to safety from there. The window was stuck, swollen from years of paint and humidity. Marcus set the basket on the floor and put his shoulder into it. On the third try, it gave way with a screech of old wood and glass. Rain immediately started blowing into the room. Marcus looked down at the roof below. It was maybe a 6-foot drop, and the roof was slanted, but not too steep. The bigger problem was that he could see water lapping at the edges of it. The flood was rising faster than he'd thought possible. Marcus picked up the basket with both babies inside. They were crying again, but quietly now, like they were too tired or too scared for the full-throated wails from before. He could feel them shifting in the basket, small and warm and completely dependent on him not to drop them. "Okay," he said, mostly to himself. "Here we go." Getting through the window while carrying the basket was like trying to solve a puzzle. While the house was falling down around him, Marcus managed to get one leg over the sill, then had to twist his body to pass the basket through the opening. For one terrifying moment, he nearly lost his grip on it, but then he was through and standing on the slick roof with the babies safe in their improvised boat. The water below was definitely higher now, maybe 4 feet deep and moving fast. Marcus could see the current carrying larger pieces of debris, a mailbox, what looked like part of a fence, a lawnmower that must have floated out of someone's garage. Getting into that water while trying to protect 2 babies would be suicide, but staying on the roof wasn't an option either. The house was groaning more loudly now, and Marcus could see that the water line on the sides was still climbing. Whatever was happening downstream, whether a dam had broken or the storm drains had backed up, the flood wasn't slowing down. Marcus heard shouting and looked across the street. Mrs. Patterson was still on her porch, but now she wasn't alone. 3 or 4 other neighbors had gathered with her, all of them pointing toward the Henderson house. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. One of them had a flashlight and was waving it back and forth. "Can you hear me?" Marcus shouted, but the wind grabbed his words and scattered them. He waved back with his free hand, the basket held tight against his side with the other. The neighbors were talking among themselves, gesturing. Mrs. Patterson was pointing toward something Marcus couldn't see. Then one of the men disappeared from the group and came back a moment later dragging something long and white. A canoe. Someone had found a canoe. Marcus watched as 2 of the men carried it to the edge of the flood water. The current immediately tried to grab it, but they held on, one at each end. Mrs. Patterson was still pointing and shouting, trying to direct them toward the house. It was going to take them several minutes to navigate the current and reach the house, if they could manage it at all. Marcus looked down at the basket. The babies had gone quiet again, but he could see their eyes reflecting his flashlight beam. They were watching him, trusting him to keep them safe. The roof shuddered under his feet. Marcus looked down and saw that the water was now touching the bottom edge of the roof. The house was starting to shift slightly, like it was trying to float but couldn't quite break free from its foundation. They didn't have several minutes. Marcus made a decision that later he would never be able to fully explain, even to himself. He sat down on the edge of the roof, his legs hanging over the side, and lowered the basket into the floodwater. The plastic basket bobbed like he'd hoped it would, floating high enough to keep the babies dry. But the current immediately started pushing it away from the house. Marcus slid off the roof and into the water, one hand gripping the edge of the basket. The cold was shocking. The water was much deeper than it had been when he'd first approached the house, over his chest now and moving so fast that his feet couldn't find the bottom. Marcus kicked hard, trying to steer the basket toward the neighbors with the canoe while fighting to keep his own head above water. The basket was harder to control than he'd expected. The baby's weight made it want to tip, and every piece of debris that bumped into it threatened to knock it over. Marcus could hear the babies crying again, louder now, scared by the motion. And the cold spray of water. "It's okay," he gasped, though he wasn't sure they could hear him over the storm. "It's okay." Almost there. But they weren't almost there. The current was carrying them away from the neighbors, toward the deeper water at the end of the street. Marcus could see the canoe, but it looked impossibly far away. His legs were getting tired from kicking, and his grip on the basket was starting to slip. A piece of wood, maybe part of a deck railing, slammed into his shoulder. Marcus lost his grip on the basket for a second and watched in horror as it spun away from him. He lunged forward and managed to catch it again, but not before water had sloshed over the edge, soaking the blankets inside. The babies were screaming now, high-pitched wails of terror and discomfort. Marcus pulled the basket against his chest and tried to swim, one-handed toward the shallower water near Mrs. Patterson's house. His jacket was weighing him down, but he didn't dare let go of the basket long enough to take it off. "Here." "Over." "Here." Marcus looked up and saw the canoe, much closer than he'd thought. The two men were paddling hard against the current, trying to reach him. One of them was leaning forward, shouting instructions. "Don't try to swim to us. Stay where you are. We're coming." Marcus stopped fighting the current and focused on keeping the basket steady. The babies were still crying, but they were alive. And above water, that was what mattered. The canoe bumped against him a few seconds later. Hands reached out to grab the basket, lifting it carefully out of the water. Marcus heard one of the men say, "Jesus, they're so little," and then someone was pulling him up and over the side of the canoe. Marcus collapsed in the bottom of the boat, coughing up floodwater and shivering from the cold. But he could see the basket balanced carefully between the two men, and he could hear the babies crying, which meant they were breathing, which meant they were alive. "You got them," one of the men said. Marcus recognized him now as Jim Morrison, who lived 3 houses down from Mrs. Patterson. "You actually got them both." The other man was Gary something. Marcus didn't know his last name, but he'd seen him around the neighborhood. Gary was looking down at the babies with an expression of amazement. "They're okay, cold and scared, but okay." The trip back to Mrs. Patterson's house felt like it took forever, but it was probably only a few minutes. More neighbors had gathered on her porch, including someone Marcus didn't recognize who turned out to be a paramedic named Lisa. She'd been driving home from her shift when the storm hit and had seen the commotion. Lisa took charge as soon as they reached the porch. She had Gary and Jim carry the basket inside while she examined the babies with a small flashlight. Marcus stood dripping in Mrs. Patterson's living room, watching as she checked their breathing, felt for injuries, looked in their eyes. "They're hypothermic, but not severely," Lisa announced after a few minutes. "We need to get them warm and dry, and then they need to get to a hospital for a full evaluation. But they're going to be fine." Mrs. Patterson had already found some towels and was helping Lisa wrap the babies. "Where are their parents?" she asked. "Someone needs to call Tom and Sarah." "I'll handle that," said Jim. "They're staying with Sarah's sister across town." They thought the house would be okay, thought the flooding wouldn't reach this far up the hill. Marcus sank into Mrs. Patterson's couch, exhaustion hitting him all at once. He was still dripping wet and probably getting her furniture soaked, but he didn't have the energy to care. The adrenaline that had gotten him through the rescue was wearing off, leaving him shaky and cold. Lisa looked over at him. "You okay? You took in a lot of water back there." "I'm fine," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. His shoulder ached where the debris had hit him, and he was starting to realize how close they'd all come to a very different ending. "What you did was incredibly brave," Lisa continued, "and incredibly stupid. You could have drowned all three of you." Marcus looked at the babies, now wrapped in dry towels and looking much less distressed. "But we didn't." "No," Lisa smiled, "you didn't." The sound of sirens was getting closer. Through Mrs. Patterson's front window, Marcus could see the flashing lights of what looked like several emergency vehicles. The cavalry was arriving, but only after the real work was already done. Tom and Sarah Henderson arrived 20 minutes later in Sarah's sister's car, having driven through flooded streets and around road closures to get there. Sarah was crying before she even made it through Mrs. Patterson's front door, and Tom looked like he'd aged 10 years since Marcus had last seen him. "We couldn't get back," Sarah was saying over and over as she reached for her babies. "The roads were blocked, and we tried to call, but the phones weren't working. We thought they were safe. We thought the water wouldn't get that high." "They're okay," Lisa assured her. "Cold and scared, but healthy. This man saved their lives." For the first time since arriving, Tom looked directly at Marcus. "You're the mechanic, right? From down the street?" Marcus nodded. "Marcus Chun." Tom's voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you. I don't even know where to start." "You don't need to thank me," Marcus said, and he meant it. Looking at the reunited family, at the babies safe in their mother's arms, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, purpose maybe, or just the simple satisfaction of knowing he'd done something that mattered. The paramedics wanted to take the babies to the hospital for observation, and Tom and Sarah were eager to go with them. As they prepared to leave, Sarah approached Marcus. "I want you to know," she said, "that Emma and Ethan are alive because of you. Because you were willing to risk everything for two babies who weren't even yours. I'll never forget that. We'll never forget that." After they left, the neighbors gradually dispersed. The storm was finally starting to weaken. Though water was still standing in the streets, Mrs. Patterson insisted that Marcus stay until morning rather than trying to get back to his own apartment. "Besides," she said, "I think your place might have some water damage. I saw it backing up toward your building earlier." Marcus spent the night on Mrs. Patterson's couch, wrapped in a borrowed bathrobe while his clothes dried. He should have been thinking about practical things: his apartment, his car, whether he'd be able to get to work in the morning. Instead, he found himself thinking about the babies, about the weight of the basket in his hands and the sound of their crying in the storm. He'd saved them. Somehow, against all odds and common sense, he'd actually saved them. When morning came, the sun broke through the clearing clouds like a promise. The flood water had receded significantly, leaving behind a landscape of mud and debris that would take weeks to clean up. Marcus walked back to his apartment building and found that Mrs. Patterson had been right. His first-floor unit had taken on several inches of water. But as he stood in his damaged living room, looking at his ruined furniture and soggy belongings, Marcus found that he didn't care as much as he should have. He'd lost some things, but he'd gained something too. Something he couldn't quite name yet, but that felt important in a way that transcended the material damage around him. His phone, which had survived the night in Mrs. Patterson's house, buzzed with a text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "This is Sarah Henderson. I wanted you to have my number in case you need anything. The babies are doing great, and the doctors say they'll make a full recovery." Thank you again for giving us our children back. You'll always be part of our family now." Marcus read the message 3 times before putting the phone away. He looked around his water-damaged apartment and realized that for the first time in months, he was actually looking forward to what came next. 3 weeks after the flood, Marcus found himself standing in the baby aisle of Target, staring at rows of colorful toys and wondering how he'd gotten there. The invitation had come from Sarah Henderson 2 days earlier, a text message that had caught him off guard while he was replacing the water-damaged drywall in his apartment. "Emma and Ethan's first birthday is coming up next month. Would you like to come to their party? It wouldn't feel right celebrating without you there." Marcus had stared at the message for a long time before responding with a simple, "I'd be honored." Now surrounded by stuffed animals and plastic rings designed to help babies learn colors, he felt completely out of his depth. What do you buy for babies you saved from a flood? What was appropriate? What wasn't too much or too little? A woman with 2 toddlers in her cart noticed him standing motionless in front of a display of musical toys. First time shopping for babies? She asked with a knowing smile. Is it that obvious? The deer-in-headlights look is pretty universal. How old are they? Almost 1. Twins. Marcus picked up a toy piano with oversized keys. I have no idea what I'm doing. At that age, they like anything that makes noise or lights up. But honestly, they'll probably be more interested in the wrapping paper and boxes. She pointed to a set of soft blocks with different textures on each side. Those are always a hit. Safe, educational, and nearly indestructible. Marcus thanked her and added the blocks to his cart, along with 2 identical stuffed elephants that played lullabies when you pressed their bellies. As he stood in the checkout line, he wondered again how his life had changed so dramatically. In just a few weeks, before the flood, his weekends were spent watching sports on his small television or doing odd jobs around the apartment complex for extra cash. Now he was buying birthday presents for babies and looking forward to a party at a house he'd only ever seen from the outside during a natural disaster. The Henderson house looked completely different in the daylight and without 3 feet of floodwater surrounding it. Tom had clearly put a lot of work into repairing the damaged new siding on the lower level. Fresh paint, a small garden where Sarah had planted flowers that were just beginning to bloom. The front yard was full of cars, and Marcus could hear children's laughter coming from the backyard. He sat in his truck for a moment, gifts on the passenger seat, and wondered if this was a mistake. These people had their own lives, their own friends and family. He was just the neighbor who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But before he could talk himself into leaving, Sarah appeared on the front porch, waving when she spotted his truck. "Marcus, I'm so glad you came." She looked healthier than she had that night in Mrs. Patterson's living room, her color back and her smile genuine. "Come on back, everyone's in the yard." The backyard had been transformed into a baby party wonderland. Colorful balloons were tied to fence posts, and a long table covered with a bright tablecloth held more food than Marcus had seen in one place since his wedding reception years ago. Adults sat in lawn chairs, watching as several toddlers played on a blanket spread under a large oak tree. Tom was manning a grill in the corner, wearing an apron that said, "Daddy's Little Helpers," with 2 tiny handprints on it. "Tom, look who's here," Sarah called out. Tom looked up from the grill and broke into a wide grin. He set down his spatula and crossed the yard in quick strides, pulling Marcus into a hug that lasted longer than Marcus expected. "Man, I wasn't sure you'd come. Sarah's been talking about this party for weeks, making sure everything was perfect. Because you were going to be here. I wouldn't have missed it," Marcus said, and realized he meant it. Sarah led him over to where the babies were sitting on the blanket, surrounded by toys and what appeared to be several watchful grandparents. Emma and Ethan had grown noticeably in the 3 weeks since the flood. They were sitting up on their own now, babbling at each other in the mysterious language that twins seemed to share. "They look so different," Marcus said, kneeling down. beside the blanket. "Everything's different now," Sarah said softly. "After what happened, after almost losing them, every day feels like a gift. Every milestone, every new tooth, every time they laugh, it all means more somehow." Emma looked up at Marcus and reached toward him with chubby fingers. Without thinking, he extended his hand, and she grabbed his index finger with surprising strength. Ethan, not to be outdone, crawled over and pulled himself up to standing by gripping Marcus's sleeve. "They remember you," Tom said, appearing beside them with a plate of food. "I know that sounds crazy, but I swear they do. Emma especially gets excited whenever we talk about you. Babies don't remember things that happened when they were that young," Marcus said, but even as he said it, he wasn't entirely convinced. Emma was studying his face with intense concentration, like she was trying to place him. An older woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached the group. "You must be Marcus. I'm Helen, Sarah's mother. I cannot thank you enough for what you did for our family. Really, I just did what anyone would do." "No," Helen said firmly, "not anyone. Most people would have waited for the professionals or been too scared to act. You risked your life for babies who weren't yours, and that makes you family as far as we're concerned." Over the next hour, Marcus was introduced to what felt like half the neighborhood, plus various aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. Everyone seemed to know the story of the flood rescue, and everyone wanted to shake his hand or clap him on the shoulder. It was more attention than Marcus had received in years, and while part of him felt uncomfortable with the praise, another part found it oddly warming. "You're not used to this, are you?" Marcus turned to find a man about his own age holding a beer and wearing a good-natured smile. "I'm sorry?" Being the center of attention. "I'm David, Tom's brother. And you look like someone who'd rather be anywhere else right now." Marcus laughed despite himself. "That obvious?" "Only to someone who feels the same way at family gatherings. Want to help me set up the gift table? It's quieter over there." They spent the next few minutes arranging presents on a folding table near the back fence. David, it turned out, was a teacher at the local elementary school and had similar feelings about large social gatherings. "Tom's told me a lot about you," David said as they worked. "Not just about the rescue, but about how you've been checking on them since then. Helping with repairs, bringing dinner when Sarah was too tired to cook. You know you didn't have to do all that, right?" "I wanted to," Marcus said, realizing as he said it that it was true. "I don't have much family of my own anymore. My ex-wife and I divorced a couple years ago, no kids. My parents passed when I was in my 20s. It's nice to feel useful." "I guess," David nodded thoughtfully. "Tom mentioned you're a mechanic. You like the work?" "It's honest work. I'm good with my hands, always have been. But it's not exactly a calling, you know. It pays the bills, keeps me busy." Marcus straightened a gift bag that had fallen over. "What about teaching? Is that a calling for you?" "Most days. I love working with kids, seeing them figure things out, watching them grow. But the pay isn't great, and sometimes I wonder what it would be like to do something that felt more immediately important." "Like saving babies from floods?" David laughed. "Like saving babies from floods. Though I think what you did that night was more than just being in the right place at the right time. Tom says you didn't hesitate, not for a second. That takes a special kind of person." Before Marcus could respond, Sarah appeared beside them carrying Emma. "Sorry to interrupt, but someone wants to say hello again." She handed the baby to Marcus without asking if he wanted to hold her. Emma settled against his chest like she belonged there, one small hand gripping his shirt while she looked around the party from her new vantage point. Marcus had held babies before his various cousins' children at family gatherings, but this felt different somehow. "More natural. She likes you," Sarah observed. "She's usually pretty shy with people she doesn't know well." "Maybe she remembers being rescued," David suggested. "Or maybe she just knows a good person when she sees one," Sarah said. "Babies are pretty intuitive about that kind of thing. The gift opening portion of the party happened after the cake, with Emma and Ethan sitting in matching high chairs, while Sarah and Tom helped them unwrap presents. The babies were more interested in the wrapping paper than the gifts themselves, just as the woman at Target had predicted. When they got to Marcus's presents, Emma immediately put one corner of the stuffed elephant in her mouth, while Ethan banged the soft blocks together with obvious delight. "These are perfect," Sarah said, holding up one of the elephants. "Look, they match, but they're slightly different colors, so we can tell them apart." The woman at the store said twins like having similar things that are still uniquely theirs, Marcus explained. "You really did your research," Tom said, impressed. "Most people just buy whatever's closest to the front of the store." As the afternoon wore on and the party began to wind down, Marcus found himself helping with cleanup without being asked. He stacked chairs, collected paper plates, and carried leftover food into the kitchen while Sarah got the babies ready for their afternoon naps. "You don't have to do all this," Tom said, appearing beside him with an armload of empty bottles and cans. "I don't mind. It's the least I can do after that amazing party." About that, Tom set down the bottles and turned to face Marcus directly. "Sarah and I have been talking, and we want to ask you something. Feel free to say no if it's too weird or too much, but we'd like you to be more involved in the kids' lives. Not just for parties and special occasions, but regularly." Marcus paused in the middle of folding a tablecloth. "What do you mean?" "We mean we'd like you to be their honorary uncle. Someone who's there for birthdays and holidays, but also for the regular stuff. Someone they can count on as they grow up. Someone who's part of their story from the beginning." "Why me?" Marcus asked, though he already knew he wanted to say yes. "Because you saved their lives," Sarah said, appearing in the kitchen doorway with Emma on her hip. "Because you've shown up for us ever since, without being asked and without expecting anything in return. Because they light up when they see you, and because we've never seen you smile the way you do when you're holding them." Marcus looked at Emma, who was reaching toward him again with grabby hands. He took her from Sarah, and she immediately settled against his shoulder with a contented sigh. "What would that look like exactly?" "Whatever you're comfortable with." Tom said, "Maybe dinner once a week? Maybe babysitting occasionally when we need a date night? Maybe just being someone they know they can call when they're older and need advice from someone who isn't their parents." Marcus thought about his empty apartment, his quiet evenings, his weekends with no plans beyond basic maintenance and grocery shopping. He thought about Emma's small hand gripping his finger and Ethan's delighted laughter when he'd played peekaboo during the party. He thought about how different everything had felt since the night of the flood, how much lighter the world seemed when he had somewhere to be and people who were genuinely happy to see him. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "I'd like that a lot." Sarah's face broke into a wide smile. "Really? Really? But I should probably learn more about babies first. I have no idea what I'm doing." "None of us do," Tom laughed. "We're all just making it up as we go along, but we can learn together." That evening, Marcus drove home with a container of leftover birthday cake and a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. It took him most of the drive to identify it, and when he finally did, it surprised him. He felt needed. Not just useful, which was how he felt at work when he fixed someone's car, but actually needed by people who mattered to him. His apartment, with its new drywall and replacement furniture, felt different when he walked in. Not lonely, exactly, but quiet in a way that felt temporary rather than permanent. Like it was just a place to sleep and eat between the more important parts of his life. Marcus put the leftover cake in his refrigerator and noticed the calendar Sarah had given him, with Emma and Ethan's weekly pediatrician appointments marked in bright blue ink. Next to those, in his own handwriting, he'd written dinner with Henderson's for Thursday evenings and babysitting for the following Saturday night. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Thank you for making their first birthday so special. They're both asleep with their elephants. Marcus smiled and typed back, thank you for including me. Best party I've been to in years. Get used to it. You're family now, which means you're stuck with us for all the holidays, birthdays, graduations, and everything in between. Looking forward to it, Marcus replied, and meant every word. 2 weeks later, Marcus was getting his first real test. As an honorary uncle, Tom and Sarah had tickets to a concert Tom's coworker had given him last minute, their first date night since before the babies were born. Sarah had been nervous about leaving Emma and Ethan with anyone other than family. But when Tom suggested Marcus, she'd agreed immediately. You sure you can handle both of them? She asked for the third time as she and Tom prepared to leave. Emma's been a little fussy today, and Ethan's getting his first tooth, so he might be cranky. We'll be fine, Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. You have your phones, right? In case I need to call? Of course. But honestly, you've been here for dinner twice a week for the past month. You know their routine better than most people. It was true. Marcus had become a regular fixture at the Henderson house, arriving most Thursday evenings with takeout from whatever restaurant Sarah was craving, and staying to help with bath time and bedtime stories. He'd learned that Emma liked to have her back rubbed while she fell asleep, and that Ethan would only take his bottle if you held him in a very specific position. He knew which lullabies worked best and which toys were guaranteed to cause a meltdown if the babies had to share them. There's milk in the fridge, diapers are in the nursery, and both of them should go down for bed around 7:30, Sarah said, kissing each baby goodbye. Call if you need anything, even if it seems silly. Go, Marcus said, shooing them toward the door. Have fun, we've got this. After Tom and Sarah left, Marcus looked down at the two babies sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by toys. They looked back at him with identical expressions of curiosity, like they were wondering what this evening would bring. Okay. Guys, Marcus said, settling onto the floor beside them. What do you want to do first? For the next hour they played. Marcus built towers of blocks for Ethan to knock down, while Emma practiced pulling herself up to standing using the coffee table. He read them books, making different voices for the characters and earning delighted giggles when he did the silly voice for the duck in their favorite story. When Emma got fussy, he picked her up and walked her around the house, pointing out things through the windows while Ethan crawled after them. Bath time was more challenging. Marcus had helped with baths before, but always with Sarah or Tom there to take the lead. Trying to keep two slippery babies safe in the tub while also making sure they got clean was like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept moving. By the time he got them out and dried off, all three of them were soaked. At least you guys smell good, Marcus said, wrestling Ethan into his pajamas while Emma sat on the floor, naked and apparently in no hurry to get dressed. Your parents are going to think I gave you both actual baths instead of letting you splash around for 20 minutes. Bedtime went more smoothly. Marcus had figured out the routine during his previous visits. Bottles first, then quiet time in the nursery with dimmed lights and soft music. Emma fell asleep first, curled up in her crib, with her stuffed elephant tucked under her arm. Ethan took longer, fussing softly until Marcus picked him up and walked him around the room, humming an old song his own mother used to sing to him. By 8 o'clock, both babies were asleep, and Marcus was sitting in the Hendersons' living room, feeling ridiculously proud of himself. He'd done it. He'd successfully taken care of two babies for an entire evening without anyone getting hurt or having a complete meltdown. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. How's everything going? Both asleep, he typed back. No casualties. You're amazing. We'll be home by 10. Marcus settled back on the couch and looked around the living room. Toys were scattered. Across the floor, there were Cheerios ground into the carpet from dinner, and someone had left a wet washcloth on the coffee table. It was chaos, But it was the kind of chaos that spoke of life being lived fully, of love and laughter, and the beautiful mess that came with raising children. His own apartment felt sterile by comparison, clean and quiet and completely lacking in the kind of joyful disorder that made a house feel like a home. Marcus was still thinking about that when Tom and Sarah returned, looking relaxed and happy in a way he hadn't seen since before the flood. "How was the concert?" he asked as they paid the babysitter they'd insisted on paying him despite his protests. "Amazing," Sarah said. "I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a conversation without being interrupted by crying or someone needing a diaper change." "And how were our angels?" Tom asked. "Perfect. Well, mostly perfect. Emma had a small meltdown when I tried to put her diaper on backwards, and Ethan discovered he could fling Cheerios across the room. But other than that, no problems." Sarah laughed. "That sounds about right. Thank you so much for doing this. It means more than you know." "It was fun," Marcus said, and realized he meant it. "Exhausting but fun." "Get used to it," Tom said, clapping him on the shoulder. "We're definitely going to need more date nights now that we know the kids are in good hands." Driving home that night, Marcus found himself thinking about what Tom had said about needing more date nights. It occurred to him that he was becoming integral to this family's life in a way that went beyond the dramatic circumstances of their first meeting. He wasn't just the man who had saved the babies anymore. He was Uncle Marcus, the person they called when they needed help or wanted to share good news. It was a role he'd never expected to play, and one he was discovering he was good at. More than good at, he was finding purpose in it, the kind of deep satisfaction that had been missing from his life for longer than he cared to admit. The following Saturday, Marcus was at Home Depot, picking up supplies to fix a leaky faucet in his apartment when he ran into David Henderson. Tom's brother was loading bags of mulch into his car, looking harried and slightly overwhelmed. "Marcus, good to see you. How are the honorary uncle duties going?" "Really well, actually. I babysat the other night and somehow managed not to break anything," David laughed. "That's about all you can hope for with twins that age. They're like tiny tornadoes." He gestured toward his car full of landscaping supplies. "I'm trying to get my yard in shape before my girlfriend comes to visit next week. She's been living in California for the past year, and I want everything to look perfect when she gets here." "Sounds serious." "It is. We've been doing the long-distance thing, but she's moving back to town next month. I'm nervous about how it's all going to work out, to be honest. A lot has changed while she's been gone." Marcus thought about how much his own life had changed in just the past few months. "Sometimes change is good," he said. "Sometimes it leads you to things you didn't know you were missing." "Yeah? Speaking from experience?" "Something like that. Before the flood, I was pretty isolated. Work, home, not much else. Now I've got this whole extended family I never expected. It's made everything better, even the regular everyday stuff." David smiled. "Tom and Sarah talk about you all the time. How much you've helped them, how good you are with the kids. I think you've become as important to them as they have to you." "I hope so. They've given me something I didn't even realize I needed." "What's that?" Marcus thought for a moment. "A reason to look forward to tomorrow." They talked for a few more minutes before David had to leave to finish his yard work. But his words stayed with Marcus as he completed his own shopping and headed home. Tom and Sarah talked about him to other people. He'd become important to them, not just as the person who had rescued their children, but as himself. As Marcus Chun, the mechanic who made them laugh and helped with bedtime and could be counted on to show up when he said he would. That evening, as Marcus fixed his leaky faucet, he found himself thinking about the future in a way he hadn't in years. Not just the immediate future, tomorrow's work schedule, or next week's dinner with the Hendersons, but the long-term future. What would it be like to watch Emma and Ethan grow up? To be there for their first steps, their first words, their first day of school. To be someone they could count on, someone who would always be part of their story. The idea filled him with a warmth that had nothing to do with the hot water flowing from his newly repaired faucet. For the first time since his divorce, Marcus Chun was looking forward to the years ahead. He had a family again, unconventional though it might be. He had a place where he belonged, people who needed him, and children who lit up when they saw him coming. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was turning out to be exactly the life he wanted. The emergency room was busy for a Tuesday afternoon, filled with the usual collection of minor injuries and worried parents. Marcus sat in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, holding Ethan against his chest while the toddler whimpered softly. Across from him, Sarah paced back and forth with Emma, who was mercifully uninjured but clearly upset by all the commotion. "I should have been watching him more closely," Sarah said for the fourth time since they'd arrived. "He was right there, and then I turned around for literally 2 seconds to answer the phone, and he was on the floor with blood everywhere." "Accidents happen," Marcus said, adjusting his hold on Ethan as the little boy tried to touch the bandage, covering the cut on his forehead. "Kids that age get into everything. You couldn't have prevented this." It had been 18 months since the flood, and Marcus had become so integrated into the Henderson family's daily life that when Sarah called him in a panic about Ethan's fall, he'd left work immediately without a second thought. His boss at the garage, a gruff man named Pete, who'd never shown much interest in his employees' personal lives, had surprised Marcus by telling him to go and not worry about the time. "Family comes first," Pete had said simply, and Marcus had realized that somehow, without him noticing, his relationship with the twins had become common knowledge among his coworkers. The cut on Ethan's forehead had looked worse than it actually was, according to the triage nurse, but it was deep enough to require stitches. At 20 months old, Ethan was walking steadily and climbing everything he could reach, which made him a constant source of anxiety for his parents. Emma, meanwhile, had developed into a more cautious child, preferring to observe before acting, though she was talking earlier and more clearly than her brother. "Henderson family?" A young doctor in scrubs appeared at the entrance to the waiting area. "We're ready for Ethan." The procedure itself was quick, but traumatic for everyone involved. Ethan screamed throughout the 3 stitches, while Sarah held his hands and Marcus kept his legs still. Emma, who had been brought along because there was no time to arrange childcare, watched the whole thing with wide, serious eyes from her. "Stroller. He's going to be fine," the doctor assured them as he finished up. "Keep the area clean and dry for the next few days, and bring him back if you notice any signs of infection. Kids this age heal remarkably fast." "How long before the stitches come out?" Sarah asked, running her fingers through Ethan's sweaty hair. "About a week. And don't worry, this probably won't be your last trip to the emergency room with an active toddler. I've seen some families 3 or 4 times with the same kid." As they prepared to leave, Tom arrived, having rushed from his job at the insurance office. He looked pale and worried until he saw Ethan sitting up and reaching for a sticker the nurse had given him. "How is he?" Sarah said there was blood everywhere. 3 stitches, Marcus reported. He was very brave. Tom scooped up his son, examining the bandage carefully. "What happened, buddy? Did you try to fly again?" "He climbed onto the kitchen counter," Sarah explained. "I've told him 1,000 times not to do that, but he wanted the cookies I'd put up there. Lost his balance and hit the corner of the cabinet on his way down. At least now we know the child-proofing wasn't thorough enough," Tom said ruefully. "I'll get more cabinet locks this weekend." That evening, Marcus stayed for dinner and helped with the bedtime routine, which was more challenging than usual with an injured and cranky Ethan. The little boy wanted Marcus to carry him everywhere and refused to let anyone else read his bedtime story. "I think you've officially become his favorite person," Sarah observed as Marcus emerged from the nursery after finally getting Ethan to sleep. "Just tonight. Tomorrow he'll be back to preferring I don't think so. He's been asking for Uncle Marcus constantly lately. This morning he stood by the front door for 10 minutes, saying your name over and over. Marcus felt the familiar warmth that came with being needed by the twins. Over the past year and a half, he'd watched them grow from babies into distinct little people with their own personalities and preferences. Emma was cautious and thoughtful, preferring books and puzzles to physical challenges. Ethan was fearless and energetic, always looking for the next adventure or the highest thing to climb. Tom and I have been talking, Sarah continued, settling onto the couch next to him, about making this arrangement more official. What do you mean? We want to put you in our will, as the twins' guardian if anything ever happened to both of us. Marcus stared at her. That's a huge responsibility. It's also a huge honor. We can't think of anyone we'd trust more with their lives. Sarah's voice was steady, but Marcus could see the emotion behind her words. You saved them once already. And more than that, you love them. Really love them, not just because you feel obligated to. I do love them, Marcus said quietly. More than I ever expected to love anyone. Then you'll consider it? Marcus thought about what she was asking. To be named as the twins' guardian would mean being responsible for their entire futures, their education, their emotional well-being, their development into adults. It was terrifying and overwhelming and also felt completely right. Yes, he said, I'll consider it. But I want to talk to a lawyer, make sure I understand everything that would be involved. Of course. We've already spoken to our attorney. She said we'd need to set up a trust fund for their expenses, and there would be legal paperwork to establish your rights and responsibilities. But the important thing is that we know they'd be loved and cared for. 2 weeks later, Marcus found himself in the law office of Patricia Wells, a family attorney who specialized in guardianship arrangements. She was a woman in her 50s with a warm manner and an obvious affection for children, evident from the toys scattered around her office and the family photos covering her desk. This is a wonderful thing you're doing, she told Marcus after explaining the legal requirements. Not many people are willing to take on this kind of commitment for children who aren't biologically related to them. They feel like mine, Marcus said simply. I can't imagine my life without them now. That's exactly what Tom and Sarah said when I spoke with them. They mentioned that you've been involved in the children's lives since they were infants, that you're already functioning as a family unit. It started as an emergency situation, but it's become much more than that. Ms. Wells nodded thoughtfully. I should mention that there are some practical considerations we need to discuss. If you were to become their guardian, you'd need adequate housing for 2 growing children. Your current living situation might not be suitable. Marcus had been thinking about that since Sarah first brought up the possibility. His 1-bedroom apartment, while sufficient for a single man, would be cramped and impractical for a family of 3. I've been looking at houses, he said. Nothing too expensive, but something with enough space for them to grow up. That's wise. You'd also want to consider your employment situation. Raising twins is expensive, and you'd need to ensure you could provide for their needs while also being available for school events, doctor's appointments, and all the other demands of parenthood. I've been thinking about that too. My current job pays decent money, but the hours aren't always family-friendly. I might need to make some changes. They spent the next hour going over the legal paperwork and discussing the financial arrangements Tom and Sarah wanted to put in place. By the time Marcus left the office, his head was spinning with information about trusts and life insurance policies and educational savings accounts. But underneath the complexity, he felt a deep sense of rightness about the whole arrangement. That weekend, Marcus drove through several neighborhoods, looking at houses for sale and trying to imagine what it would be like to live there with Emma and Ethan. Most of the homes in his price range were small and needed work, but he found himself drawn to a 3-bedroom ranch house in a quiet neighborhood about 15 minutes from the Hendersons. The house had good bones, as his father would have said, but it needed updating. The kitchen was from the 1980s. The bathrooms needed new fixtures, and the whole place could use fresh paint. But it had a large backyard with mature trees, and the bedrooms were spacious enough for growing children. The elementary school in the district had good ratings, and there was a park within walking distance. Marcus called the realtor and scheduled a proper viewing for the following week. "You're really serious about this house hunting thing," Tom said when Marcus mentioned it during their Thursday dinner together. They were sitting in the living room while Sarah bathed the twins upstairs. "If I'm going to be their potential guardian, I need to be prepared. Your attorney made it clear that my current apartment wouldn't work for a family." "I know this is a lot to take on," Tom said seriously. "Are you sure you want this responsibility? Because once the paperwork is signed, you'd be legally committed to raising our children if something happened to us." Marcus looked around the Henderson living room, with its scattered toys and family photos and the general organized chaos that came with toddlers. He thought about his quiet apartment, his solitary evenings, the life he'd been living before the flood changed everything. "I'm sure," he said. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The house purchase process took longer than Marcus expected. There were inspections and appraisals and negotiations over repairs. His mortgage application required extensive documentation of his income and employment history. But by early fall, he was the owner of a 3-bedroom house with a large backyard and enough space for a family. Moving day was a family affair. Tom and Sarah insisted on helping, despite Marcus's protests that he could handle it himself. David showed up with his pickup truck and several of his teacher friends, turning the whole thing into an efficient assembly line of boxes and furniture. "This place has great potential," Sarah said, standing in the empty living room while the men carried in Marcus's modest collection of furniture. "With a little work, it's going to be perfect for a family." "It needs a lot of work," Marcus corrected, looking at the outdated kitchen and the carpet that definitely needed to be replaced. "That's what makes it fun. You get to make it exactly what you want." Emma and Ethan, now confidently walking and getting into everything, were fascinated by the empty house. They ran from room to room, their voices echoing off the bare walls, while Sarah and Marcus tried to keep them from climbing on boxes or getting underfoot. "This is going to be your room," Marcus told Emma, showing her the smaller of the 2 children's bedrooms. "When you come to visit Uncle Marcus." "My room?" Emma repeated, her vocabulary expanding daily. "Your room," Marcus confirmed. "And Ethan gets the room next door." The legal paperwork was finalized a month later. Marcus sat in Patricia Wells' office again, this time signing documents that officially named him as the twins' guardian in case of emergency. Tom and Sarah signed their updated wills, and everyone shook hands with the gravity of people who had just made decisions that could affect the rest of several lives. "I hope we never have to use any of this," Sarah said as they left the law office together. "But it's good to know it's there," Tom added. "We can relax a little bit knowing that Emma and Ethan would be in good hands no matter what." That evening, they celebrated with dinner at the twins' favorite restaurant, a family-friendly place with crayons on the tables and a kids' menu full of foods that could be eaten with fingers. Emma and Ethan were in good moods, laughing at their own jokes and showing off their expanding vocabularies for anyone who would listen. "To Uncle Marcus," Tom said, raising his glass of beer in a toast, "for taking on the best job in the world." "To the best honorary family a guy could ask for," Marcus replied, clinking his glass against Tom's. The challenges of his new role became apparent over the following months. Marcus had always been involved in the twins' daily care, but as their designated guardian, he felt a new weight of responsibility. He found himself researching preschools and pediatric dentists. He learned about developmental milestones and age-appropriate toys. He started thinking about college savings accounts and the importance of reading to children every day. The house renovations became a weekend project that stretched into months. Marcus tackled most of the work himself, with occasional help from Tom and David. They updated the kitchen with appliances that would be safe for curious toddlers, installed new flooring throughout the main living areas, and painted every room in cheerful, kid-friendly colors. Emma's room was decorated in soft pastels with a bookshelf that Marcus built himself and filled with picture books. Ethan's room featured bold primary colors and plenty of space for the kind of active play he preferred. The backyard became a playground, with a swing set that Marcus assembled with Tom's help and a sandbox that Emma loved and Ethan treated as his personal archaeological dig site. "You're getting pretty good at this domestic stuff," Sarah observed. One Saturday afternoon, she was watching Marcus install safety latches on all the kitchen cabinets while the twins napped upstairs. "I'm learning as I go. YouTube has been very educational. It's more than that, though. You've really thought about what they need, what would make them comfortable and happy here." Marcus paused in his work and looked around the kitchen. The house was starting to feel like a home, not just his home, but a place where Emma and Ethan could grow up safely and happily if they ever needed to. "I want them to love coming here," he said. "I want this to be a place they feel secure and welcome, whether they're visiting or living here permanently. They already love it. Emma asks every morning if we're going to Uncle Marcus's house today." The first real test of Marcus's parenting skills came on a rainy Thursday in November. Sarah called him at work, sounding frazzled and exhausted. "I hate to ask this, but is there any way you could take the kids for the night? Tom's out of town for work, and I've got this stomach bug that's just getting worse. I don't want them to catch it, and I really need to rest." "Of course," Marcus said immediately. "I'll pick them up after work." "Are you sure? I know it's short notice, and you've never had them overnight by yourself. We'll be fine. I've got everything they need here now." It was true. Over the past few months, Marcus had gradually stocked his house with duplicate versions of everything the twins used at home: cribs for their rooms, high chairs for meals, toys and books, and extra clothes. What had started as preparation for potential emergencies had become a practical necessity as the children spent more and more time at his house. The overnight stay went better than Marcus had expected. Dinner was a minor adventure involving spaghetti sauce on every available surface, but both children ate well and seemed excited about the novelty of sleeping at Uncle Marcus's house. Bath time required extra patience, since the routine was slightly different from what they were used to at home, but everyone emerged clean and happy. Bedtime was the biggest challenge. Emma settled down quickly with her favorite stuffed animal and a familiar story, but Ethan had a harder time adjusting to the different surroundings. He wanted his own crib, his own nightlight, his own specific arrangement of blankets and toys. Marcus spent over an hour sitting beside Ethan's crib, reading stories and singing lullabies until the little boy finally fell asleep. By the time both children were settled for the night, Marcus was exhausted, but also oddly proud. He'd handled his first solo overnight with minimal chaos and no major disasters. The morning brought new challenges. Emma woke up early and wanted pancakes, which Marcus didn't know how to make properly. Ethan woke up cranky and refused to wear any of the clothes Marcus had laid out for him. By the time Sarah arrived to pick them up, the kitchen was a disaster. Zone and Marcus looked like he'd been through a minor war. "How did it go?" Sarah asked, taking in the scene of breakfast dishes and scattered toys. "We survived," Marcus said with a tired smile. "Barely, but we survived." "That's all you can ask for with toddlers," Sarah laughed. "The fact that everyone's still in one piece means you did great." Later that day, after the house was cleaned up and quiet again, Marcus reflected on the experience. Taking care of Emma and Ethan for 24 hours had been exhausting, challenging, and occasionally frustrating. It had also been deeply satisfying in a way he hadn't expected. Waking up to their voices calling for him, making breakfast while they played at his feet, reading bedtime stories in their rooms in his house. It had felt natural and right in a way that surprised him. For the first time since signing the guardianship papers, Marcus truly understood what he'd committed to. It wasn't just about being there in case of an emergency. It was about being a parent in every sense of the word, with all the joy and responsibility and occasional chaos that entailed. The realization didn't scare him the way he thought it might. Instead, it filled him with a sense of purpose and anticipation. He was ready for this challenge, ready to be the father figure Emma and Ethan might need, ready to build a life that could accommodate the beautiful complexity of raising children. As winter approached and the twins celebrated their second birthday, Marcus looked back on the previous 2 years with amazement. His life had been completely transformed, not by his own planning or ambition, but by a single moment of crisis that had revealed what really mattered to him. He'd found family in the most unexpected way, and in return, he discovered parts of himself he never knew existed. The twins were thriving, growing into curious and confident toddlers who knew they were loved by multiple adults who would always put their needs first. Sarah and Tom had created a village around their children, with Marcus at the center as the uncle who was always available, always reliable, always ready to help. It wasn't the life Marcus had planned when he moved to Riverside Heights 3 years earlier, looking for a quiet place to rebuild after his divorce. But it was infinitely better than anything he could have imagined, richer and more fulfilling than the solitary existence he'd thought he wanted. Standing in his living room on a cold December evening, watching Emma and Ethan play with the toys scattered across his floor while Sarah and Tom discussed their holiday plans, Marcus felt a deep sense of contentment. This was family, messy and complicated and absolutely perfect. This was home, not just a place to live, but a place where love resided and grew and made everything else possible. The journey that had started with a desperate phone call on a stormy night had led him to exactly where he belonged, surrounded by the people who mattered most and ready for whatever challenges and joys the future might bring. The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, jarring Marcus from a deep sleep. He fumbled for his phone in the darkness, his heart already racing with the kind of dread that came with middle-of-the-night calls. "Marcus?" It was David's voice, strained and urgent. "You need to get to St. Mary's Hospital right away. Tom and Sarah were in a car accident." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. Marcus sat up in bed, trying to process the words. "Are they okay? What about the twins?" "The twins are fine. They weren't in the car. But Tom and Sarah are both in surgery. It's serious, Marcus. You need to come now." Marcus was dressed and in his truck within 10 minutes, driving through empty streets toward the hospital. His mind raced with questions and fears, but one thought kept surfacing above all others. Emma and Ethan needed him. Whatever had happened to their parents, the twins were going to need stability and care, and he was the person legally responsible for providing it. The hospital waiting room was filled with Henderson family members when Marcus arrived. David was there with his girlfriend Lisa. Tom's parents had driven down from upstate, and Sarah's sister Michelle sat clutching a coffee cup with shaking hands. Everyone looked shell-shocked and exhausted. "What happened?" Marcus asked, approaching. "David, drunk driver ran a red light and hit them head-on," David explained, his voice tight with anger and fear. "Tom has internal bleeding, and they're operating to repair damage to his spleen. Sarah has a traumatic brain injury. They're trying to reduce the swelling." Marcus felt his knees go weak. "How bad is it?" "We don't know yet. The doctors aren't making any promises about timelines or outcomes. They've been in surgery for 3 hours already." "Where are Emma and Ethan?" "With my parents at Tom and Sarah's house. They were asleep when it happened, so they don't know anything yet." Marcus sank into one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs, his mind struggling to process the magnitude of what was happening. In the space of a few hours, he might have gone from being an honorary uncle to being a single father of 2 3-year-olds. The legal paperwork they'd signed suddenly felt very real and very immediate. Marcus, Sarah's mother, Janet, approached him with red-rimmed eyes. "I want you to know that whatever happens, we support you completely. Tom and Sarah chose you for a reason, and we trust their judgment." "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Marcus admitted quietly. "None of us are ever ready for something like this," Janet said. "But love makes us ready. And those children love you, and you love them. That's what matters." The next few hours passed in a blur of waiting, pacing, and clutching coffee cups that grew cold before anyone remembered to drink them. Marcus found himself thinking about Emma and Ethan, probably sleeping peacefully in their beds, unaware that their world was about to change forever. At 6:30 a.m., a surgeon in scrubs approached the group. Everyone stood up at once, forming a semicircle around the tired-looking doctor. "Tom's surgery went well," the surgeon began, and Marcus felt a collective sigh of relief. "We were able to repair the damage to his spleen and stop the internal bleeding. He's stable, but he'll need several weeks of recovery time." "And Sarah?" Janet asked, her voice barely a whisper. The surgeon's expression grew more serious. "Sarah's injury is more complex. We've managed to reduce some of the swelling, but she's in a medically induced coma right now. We won't know the full extent of the damage until she wakes up, and we can't predict when that will be." "What does that mean exactly?" David asked. "It means we wait. Her brain needs time to heal, and we have to give it that time. She could wake up tomorrow with minimal lasting effects, or it could take weeks or months. Every brain injury is different." Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy coat. Tom would recover, but it would take time. Sarah's condition was uncertain and potentially long-term. Either way, Emma and Ethan were going to need primary care that their parents couldn't provide right now. After the surgeon left, the family huddled together to discuss practical arrangements. Tom's parents wanted to take the twins to their house upstate, but Marcus gently reminded them of the legal guardianship arrangement. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but Tom and Sarah asked me to be their guardian for a reason. The twins know me. They're comfortable at my house, and I think maintaining as much stability as possible is important right now." "But you work full-time," Tom's mother pointed out. "How will you manage childcare and everything else they need?" It was a valid concern, and one Marcus had been thinking about since David's phone call. "I'll figure it out. Maybe I can arrange to work different hours or find reliable daycare. The important thing is keeping them in familiar surroundings with people they trust." David spoke up. "I can help. Spring break is coming up, so I'll have some time off from teaching. And Lisa works from home, so she can pitch in too." "We all can," Janet added. "This is a family crisis, and we'll handle it as a family." By the time Marcus left the hospital that morning, Tom was awake and groggy but stable. Sarah remained unconscious, surrounded by monitors and machines that beeped and hummed constantly. Marcus had sat beside her bed for a few minutes, holding her hand and promising that he would take care of Emma and Ethan no matter what happened. The drive to the Henderson house felt surreal. Marcus had been there hundreds of times, but never as the person coming to collect the children for an indefinite stay. Tom's parents met him at the door, their faces grave but trying to maintain composure for the sake of the twins. Emma and Ethan were eating breakfast in their high chairs, chattering to each other in the mixed language of words and sounds that 3-year-olds used. They looked up when Marcus entered the kitchen, and both broke into wide smiles. "Uncle Marcus," Emma squealed, reaching for him with sticky fingers. "Hey there, Princess," Marcus said, lifting her out of her chair and hugging her tightly. "Did you sleep well? Where Mama?" Ethan asked, looking around the kitchen expectantly. This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. How do you explain to 3-year-olds that their parents have been hurt and won't be coming home for a while? How do you provide comfort and reassurance when you're terrified yourself? "Mama and Daddy had to go to the hospital," Marcus said carefully. settling into a chair with Emma on his lap while Ethan climbed onto his other knee. They're going to be okay, but they need to stay there for a little while so the doctors can help them feel better. We see them? Emma asked. Not right now, sweetheart. But Uncle Marcus is going to take very good care of you until they can. Come home. At your house? Ethan asked excitedly. To him, staying at Uncle Marcus's house was an adventure, not a crisis. Yes, at my house. We'll have fun together, okay? Both children seemed satisfied with this explanation, at least for now. Marcus knew there would be harder questions later, when they started to realize that their parents weren't coming back in a day or two. But for now, maintaining a sense of normalcy was the priority. Packing for the twins was more complicated than Marcus had anticipated. They needed clothes for an indefinite period, all their favorite toys and comfort items, medications, and a dozen other things that parents keep track of automatically, but that Marcus had to think through deliberately. Tom's mother helped him gather everything, writing down important information about routines, preferences, and emergency contacts. Emma won't eat if her food is touching other food on the plate, she explained, showing Marcus the special divided plates Sarah always used. And Ethan needs his blue blanket for naps or he won't sleep. The list of details seemed endless. Bedtime rituals, favorite snacks the exact way Ethan liked his milk warmed, the songs that helped Emma calm down when she was upset. Marcus realized he was about to learn aspects of parenting that he'd never had to think about during his regular visits and occasional overnight stays. By noon, Marcus's truck was loaded with car seats, suitcases, toys, and two confused but excited toddlers. The drive to his house was filled with chatter from the back seat as Emma and Ethan pointed out everything they saw and asked questions about where they were going and when they could see their parents again. Are we sleeping at your house tonight? Emma asked as they pulled into Marcus's driveway. Yes, for a few nights, Marcus said, though he had no idea how long a few nights might actually be. Yay! Both children cheered, apparently viewing this as an extended sleepover rather than the crisis it actually was. Getting the twins settled into their rooms at Marcus's house was easier than he'd expected. They were familiar with the space and excited to play with the toys that were permanently stored there. But as the afternoon wore on and it became clear that their parents weren't going to appear for dinner or bedtime, the questions became more frequent and more pointed. When Mama coming? Emma asked for the 5th time as Marcus tried to convince her to eat her dinner. I told you, sweetheart. Mama is at the hospital getting better. She'll come home when the doctors say she's all well. Tomorrow? I don't know exactly when. But Uncle Marcus will take care of you until then, okay? Emma considered this seriously, then nodded and took a bite of her chicken nuggets. Ethan, meanwhile, was more concerned with building a tower out of his French fries than asking difficult questions. Bedtime was the real challenge. Both children were used to a specific routine involving both parents, particular songs, and a complex sequence of hugs and kisses. Marcus did his best to replicate what he knew of their usual bedtime, but it wasn't the same, and both twins seemed to sense that something was different. Ethan cried for his mama for nearly an hour before finally falling asleep clutching his blue blanket. Emma was quieter but more persistent in her questions, asking repeatedly when her parents would come to say goodnight and why they weren't answering their phones. Sometimes grown-ups have to go to the hospital to get help when they're hurt, Marcus explained, sitting on the edge of her bed. It's like when you fell down and scraped your knee, remember? We had to clean it up and put a bandage on it so it would heal properly. But that didn't take all day, Emma pointed out with 3-year-old logic. Sometimes grown-up hurts take longer to heal than little kid hurts. But the doctors are very good at helping people feel better. Eventually, Emma fell asleep too, leaving Marcus alone in his house with the overwhelming responsibility of caring for 2 small children, whose world had just been turned upside down. He called the hospital for an update, learning that Tom was resting comfortably, but Sarah's condition remained unchanged. The next few days settled into a routine that was both familiar and completely new. Marcus had taken emergency leave from work, something his boss Pete had approved without question when he explained the situation. The twins woke up early, as they always did, but instead of being in their own house with their own parents, they were in Uncle Marcus's house with only him to meet their needs. Breakfast was an adventure in itself. Emma wanted her cereal in a specific bowl with a specific spoon, while Ethan refused to eat anything that wasn't cut into precise squares. Marcus found himself grateful for all the times he'd observed Sarah and Tom handling these morning negotiations, though doing it alone was significantly more challenging. "I want Mama to make my eggs," Ethan announced on the third morning, pushing away the scrambled eggs Marcus had prepared. "Mama can't make eggs right now because she's still at the hospital," Marcus said patiently. "But Uncle Marcus made them just the way you like them. No, Mama eggs." The meltdown that followed lasted 20 minutes and involved tears, thrown, food, and Ethan's insistence that nothing was right without his mother. Emma watched the whole episode with serious eyes, and Marcus could see her processing the reality that their parents weren't coming back anytime soon. The breakthrough came when David arrived with groceries and found Marcus sitting on the kitchen floor with both children, all three of them looking exhausted and overwhelmed. "Rough morning?" David asked, taking in the scene of scattered cereal and tear-stained faces. "Ethan wants his mom to make breakfast, and I don't know how to explain that she can't," Marcus said helplessly. David sat down on the floor with them. "You know what? When I was little and my mom couldn't do something I wanted, my dad would say, 'Let's do it the Uncle David way instead. Want to try doing breakfast the Uncle Marcus way?'" Something about this approach resonated with both children. Instead of focusing on what was missing, David had reframed the situation as something special and unique. Marcus took the cue and ran with it. "The Uncle Marcus way means we put chocolate chips in our pancakes," Marcus announced. "Mama never lets you have chocolate chips for breakfast, but Uncle Marcus says special circumstances call for special pancakes." Both twins perked up immediately. "Chocolate chips?" Emma asked, her tears forgotten. "Lots of chocolate chips," Marcus confirmed. The chocolate chip pancakes were a huge success, and more importantly, they established a new framework for handling the differences between life with Uncle Marcus and life with their parents. Instead of constantly comparing and finding things lacking, the children began to embrace the unique aspects of staying at Marcus's house. Still, the nights were difficult. Both children struggled with being away from their familiar bedrooms and their parents' goodnight rituals. Marcus found himself spending hours each evening moving between their rooms, reading extra stories, singing lullabies he half remembered from his own childhood, and providing comfort for fears and sadness that were too big for 3-year-old words. "I miss Mama's voice," Emma confided one night as Marcus tucked her in for the third time. "I miss it too," Marcus said honestly. "But you know what? Mama's voice is still here." He pointed to Emma's chest, "Right in your heart. And every time you remember something Mama said to you, you can hear her voice again." "Really? Really? What's something Mama always says to you at bedtime?" Emma thought for a moment. "She says I'm her sunshine girl, and she loves me to the moon and back." "Then close your eyes and listen with your heart. Can you hear her?" Saying that, Emma closed her eyes tightly, concentrating. After a moment, she smiled. "I can hear it. That's because love doesn't go away just because someone isn't in the room with you. Mama's love for you is always there, even when she can't be." These conversations became nightly occurrences, with both children learning to cope with their parents' absence by focusing on the love that remained constant. Marcus found that talking through their feelings helped him process his own fears and uncertainties about the situation. During the day, Marcus tried to maintain as much normalcy as possible. They visited the park, went grocery shopping together, and had regular playdates with other children from the twins' preschool. But every activity was colored by the questions from other parents about where Tom and Sarah were, and Marcus found himself becoming the official spokesperson for the family's crisis. "How are they doing?" was the most common question, referring both to the twins and their parents. "Taking it one day at a time" became Marcus's standard response. The truth was more complicated. The twins were resilient in the way that children often are, adapting to their new routine with remarkable flexibility. But there were moments when the reality of the situation would hit them unexpectedly, resulting in tears and tantrums that seemed to come from nowhere. Emma developed a habit of carrying around a photo of her parents, showing it to strangers and explaining that they were at the hospital but would come home soon. Ethan became clingy with Marcus, refusing to let him out of sight and panicking if Marcus even went to the bathroom alone. "It's normal," David assured Marcus during one of his daily check-ins. "They're processing trauma in their own way. The important thing is that they feel safe with you, and they obviously do." Marcus wasn't so sure about that. There were moments when he felt completely out of his depth, when he didn't know how to comfort a crying child, or handle a defiant toddler, or answer questions he didn't have answers to. But there were also moments of unexpected joy and connection that reminded him why he'd agreed to take on this responsibility in the first place. Like the morning when Emma crawled into his bed at dawn and announced, "Uncle Marcus, you're my very best friend." Or the afternoon when Ethan fell asleep in his arms while they were reading stories, his small body completely relaxed and trusting. Or the evening when both children helped him make dinner, standing on chairs pushed up to the counter and carefully measuring ingredients while chattering about their day. These moments made all the challenges worthwhile and reinforced Marcus's growing certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. 2 weeks into their stay, Marcus received the call he'd been hoping for. Tom was being discharged from the hospital and would be able to come home, though he'd need several more weeks of recovery time before returning to work. "That's wonderful news," Marcus said, though he felt an unexpected pang at the thought of the twins leaving his house. "There's more," Tom said, his voice still weak but much stronger than it had been. "Sarah woke up yesterday. She's confused and has some memory issues, but the doctors are optimistic about her recovery." Marcus had to sit down as relief flooded through him. "She's going to be okay?" "It looks like it. She has a long road ahead of her, lots of therapy and rehabilitation. But she recognized me, and she asked about the kids. She's going to make it, Marcus." That evening, Marcus sat down with Emma and Ethan to share the good news. Both children were excited about seeing their parents again, but they also had questions about what this meant for their living arrangements. "Are we going home tomorrow?" Emma asked. "Not quite yet," Marcus explained. "Daddy is coming home from the hospital, but he's still healing, so he needs to rest a lot. And Mama is getting better, but she needs to stay at the hospital a little longer to make sure she's completely well." "So we stay with you?" Ethan asked. "For a little while longer, yes. Until Mama comes home and both Mama and Daddy are feeling all better." "Good," Emma said matter-of-factly. "I like staying with you, Uncle Marcus." "I like having you here," Marcus replied, and meant it completely. The reunion with Tom was emotional for everyone involved. Marcus brought the twins to their own house for the visit, and both children were initially shy around their father, who looked different with his hospital pallor and the careful way he moved to protect his healing injuries. But within minutes, they were climbing carefully onto his lap, chattering about their adventures at Uncle Marcus's house and showing him pictures they'd drawn. Tom listened with tears in his eyes, holding his children close and thanking Marcus repeatedly for taking such good care of them. "They're thriving," Tom observed, watching Emma and Ethan play with toys they'd left behind weeks ago. "You've done an incredible job with them." "They're amazing kids," Marcus replied. "They've been so brave through all of this, because they felt safe with you. That's not something you can fake with children this age. They know when they're..." truly loved and cared for. Over the following weeks, the family slowly began to piece their lives back together. Sarah's recovery was gradual but steady. The memory issues resolved within a few days, and while she tired easily and had to relearn some basic skills, her personality and cognitive abilities remained intact. Marcus continued caring for the twins during the day while Tom recovered at home, bringing them for regular visits with their father and taking them to see their mother at the hospital as soon as the doctors cleared her for child visitors. The reunion between Sarah and her children was one of the most beautiful things Marcus had ever witnessed. Both twins were initially hesitant, confused by the hospital setting and their mother's changed appearance. But the moment Sarah spoke their names, they ran to her bed, and the sound of their laughter filled the sterile hospital room with life and hope. "My babies," Sarah whispered, holding them as tightly as her weakened condition allowed. "I missed you so much." "We missed you too, Mama," Emma said seriously. "But Uncle Marcus took very good care of us. He makes pancakes with chocolate chips." "Does he now?" Sarah looked over at Marcus with gratitude shining in her eyes. "That sounds like Uncle Marcus went above and beyond." "They were no trouble at all," Marcus said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. As Sarah's release date approached, Marcus found himself facing an unexpected emotion, sadness at the prospect of returning to his quiet house. For nearly 2 months, his home had been filled with the sounds of children playing, laughing, and learning. His mornings had begun with small voices calling for him. His evenings had ended with bedtime stories and goodnight hugs. Going back to his solitary routine felt like a loss, even though he was genuinely thrilled that the family would be reunited. "You know this doesn't end here, right?" Sarah said during one of their hospital visits. She was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, looking much more like herself despite the physical therapy equipment scattered around the room. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're not going back to being just the honorary uncle who shows up for birthdays and babysitting. You're their guardian, legally and emotionally. You're part of our family permanently now, not just during emergencies." "I know that," Marcus said. "But things will be different when you're all home together." "Different, yes, but not less important. If anything, what you've done for us these past 2 months has shown us how essential you are to our children's lives. And to ours." Sarah's words prophetic. When she finally came home 3 days later, the family dynamics had shifted in ways that made Marcus's role even more central than before. Tom was still recovering and couldn't handle the full demands of parenting 2 energetic toddlers. Sarah tired easily and needed frequent breaks from the intensity of constant childcare. Marcus found himself spending even more time at the Henderson house than he had before the accident, helping with meals and bedtime routines, and providing the extra set of hands that made everything manageable. But more than that, he'd become someone the twins turned to for comfort and security, not just their parents. Uncle Marcus read this story became a constant refrain, as did requests for his help with everything from tying shoes to settling disputes over toys. "You've become their third parent," Tom observed one evening as they watched the children play in the backyard. "Not a substitute for us, but an equal partner in raising them." Marcus looked at Emma and Ethan, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk, and felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. This was his family, chosen and cherished and absolutely perfect in its imperfection. The crisis that had tested all of them had only made their bond stronger and their commitment to each other deeper. "I can't imagine my life without them," Marcus said quietly. "Good," Tom replied. "Because they can't imagine theirs without you either." 5 years had passed since the accident that changed everything, and Marcus stood in the doorway of his kitchen, watching Emma help Ethan with his homework at the table they'd built together last summer. At 8 years old, the twins had grown into remarkable children, each with their own distinct personality, but still sharing that special bond that only twins seem to understand. Emma, now tall for her age with her mother's thoughtful eyes, was patiently explaining long division to her brother, who was more interested in drawing race cars in the margins of his math worksheet than focusing on numbers. Ethan had inherited his father's restless energy but channeled it into art and building things with his hands, much like Marcus himself. "You have to carry the one, Ethan," Emma said with the authority of someone who had mastered the concept weeks ago. "Look, I'll show you again." "I don't want to carry anything," Ethan replied, adding flame decals to his latest car creation. "Math is boring. When am I ever going to need to know how to divide 300 by 12 in real life? When you're building your race cars and need to figure out gear ratios," Marcus said, entering the kitchen and ruffling Ethan's hair. "Emma's right about carrying the one, by the way. See?" Emma said triumphantly. "Uncle Marcus knows math too." The word uncle had stuck despite everything that had changed over the years. Marcus was legally their guardian now, had adopted them officially 2 years ago when Tom and Sarah made the decision that felt right for everyone involved. But the children still called him Uncle Marcus, and it felt perfect that way. He wasn't trying to replace their parents. He was something uniquely his own in their lives. Tom appeared in the doorway, moving with the slight limp that was the only remaining sign of his injuries from the accident. His recovery had been complete, but Sarah's had taken longer, requiring months of rehabilitation and therapy to regain her full cognitive abilities. The experience had changed all of them, bringing a deeper appreciation for family and a recognition of how quickly everything could change. "How's the homework battle going?" Tom asked, settling into the chair across from the twins. "Emma's winning," Ethan said without looking up from his artistic additions to his math sheet. "She always wins at homework." "That's because I actually do the homework instead of decorating it," Emma replied, but her tone was affectionate rather than critical. The twins had learned to appreciate each other's differences over the years, with Emma's academic excellence balancing Ethan's creative spirit. "Speaking of homework," Tom said, "your mom wants to talk to all of us about something when she gets back from her meeting." Family meeting time. Marcus felt a familiar flutter of curiosity mixed with slight anxiety. Family meetings in the Henderson-Chun household, which was how they'd come to think of themselves, could mean anything from vacation planning to serious discussions about the children's futures. Sarah had returned to work part-time the previous year, taking a position with a nonprofit that advocated for brain injury survivors, but her energy levels still required careful management. "Are we in trouble?" Ethan asked, finally looking up from his artwork. "Since when are family meetings about being in trouble?" Marcus asked. "Remember the last family meeting? We planned the camping trip to Lake George. And the one before that was about getting a dog," Emma added, "which we're still waiting for, by the way. We'll discuss the dog situation when your mother gets home," Tom said diplomatically. "For now, finish your homework, both of you." As the twins returned to their work with varying degrees of enthusiasm, Marcus found himself reflecting on how naturally this domestic scene had developed. The transition from emergency guardianship to permanent adoption hadn't been without its challenges, but it had felt inevitable from the moment he'd first held those babies during the flood rescue 8 years ago. The legal process had been complex, involving family court hearings and social worker evaluations and countless forms that documented every aspect of Marcus's life and his relationship with the children. But through it all, Emma and Ethan had been clear about what they wanted. "Uncle Marcus is already our family," Emma had told the family court judge with 8-year-old certainty. "We just want to make it official so nobody can take him away from us." The judge, a woman with grown children of her own, had smiled at that and asked Ethan if he agreed. Ethan had nodded vigorously and added, "Uncle Marcus makes the best pancakes. And he knows how to fix everything that breaks, and he reads the best bedtime stories. Plus he promised to teach me how to drive when I'm 16. Did he now?" The judge had asked, looking at Marcus with amusement. In 8 years, Marcus had clarified quickly, and only if he passes his learner's permit test. The adoption had been finalized on a sunny Tuesday in October, with both children insisting on wearing their best clothes to court and bringing homemade cards they'd created for Marcus. The cards, which now hung framed in his office at the garage, featured stick figure drawings of their family and messages written in careful third-grade handwriting. Emma's card read, "Thank you for being our Uncle Marcus forever and always. Love, your daughter Emma." Ethan's was more direct. "You're the best. Thanks for adopting us. P.S. Can we get ice cream after court?" They had gotten ice cream after court, of course, and dinner at the twins' favorite restaurant, and a small celebration with extended family that had felt both monumental and perfectly ordinary at the same time. The sound of Sarah's car in the driveway interrupted Marcus's reminiscing. He heard her key in the lock, followed by her voice calling out her usual greeting. "I'm home." "Where are my favorite people?" "Kitchen," Emma called back. "Ethan's still not doing his math homework properly." "I am too doing it properly," Ethan protested. "I'm just making it more interesting." Sarah appeared in the doorway, looking tired but pleased about something. She'd cut her hair shorter since the accident, and it suited her, making her look younger and more energetic than the long style she'd worn before. The experience of recovery had changed her in subtle ways, making her more direct about what mattered and less concerned with things that didn't. "How was the meeting?" Tom asked, standing to give her a quick kiss. "Productive." "Very productive." Sarah's eyes were bright with excitement. "But let's wait until after dinner to talk about it. I want everyone's full attention for this conversation." Dinner at the Henderson-Chun house was rarely a quiet affair. Emma entertained them with stories from school about her friend Jessica's new puppy and her teacher's announcement about the upcoming science fair. Ethan described in vivid detail the fort he and his best friend Alex were building in Alex's backyard, complete with a pulley system Marcus had helped them design. Marcus found himself, as always, amazed by how normal it all felt. There had been a time when he couldn't imagine himself at a family dinner table, listening to children's chatter and helping referee minor disputes over who got the last dinner roll. Now he couldn't imagine his life any other way. After dinner, the family gathered in the living room for Sarah's mysterious announcement. The twins settled on the floor with coloring books, while the adults took their usual spots on the couch and chairs. Marcus noticed that Sarah seemed nervous, which was unusual for her. "Okay," Sarah began. "I have some news to share, and I want to hear everyone's thoughts about it." "Are we moving?" Emma asked immediately, looking up from her coloring with concern. Moving was always a worry for children who had experienced major disruptions in their lives. "No, sweetheart, we're not moving. This is about something else entirely." Sarah took a deep breath. "The organization I work for has offered me a promotion. It would mean more responsibility, better pay, and the chance to really make a difference in the lives of brain injury survivors." "That's wonderful," Marcus said immediately. "You deserve it. You've worked incredibly hard this past year." "Thank you, but there's a catch. The position would require some travel. Not a lot, but some. Maybe one trip a month, usually for just a few days at a time." Tom leaned forward slightly. "What kind of travel?" "Speaking at conferences, visiting other programs around the country, training sessions for medical professionals." "Important work, but it would mean being away from home more than I am now." Marcus could see where this was heading, and he felt a familiar sense of both honor and responsibility settling over him. The Henderson family had learned to function as a team over the years, with each adult contributing according to their abilities and availability. "You're wondering about childcare coverage," he said. "I'm wondering if our current arrangement can accommodate more flexibility," Sarah corrected gently. "You've been so incredible with Emma and Ethan, and Tom's work schedule is pretty demanding, too. I don't want to ask too much, but I also don't want to turn down this opportunity because of logistics. What exactly are you asking? Tom said. I'm asking if Marcus would be willing to take on more primary parenting responsibilities when I'm traveling. Not just emergency coverage, but planned, regular care. Marcus looked at the twins, who had stopped coloring and were listening intently to the adult conversation. At 8 years old, they were old enough to understand that decisions about work and travel affected them directly. What do you guys think?